The year is winding down. We only have a few days left, so that means it's time for my, second annual, I think? Most anticipated games list. Now, I plan on doing this every year from now on because I didn't do it the first year I had my channel, but usually there's quite a few games that I'm looking forward to, so I figured I'm just going to do this every year, like in December. So I actually have about 30 games I want to highlight, so I'm going to split this into two videos. The first one's going to be like the top 15, and the other one is going to be all the honorable mentions. So, kicking it off with number 15 is a game called Greyhill Incident. Now, I hadn't heard about this until a few months ago, and it's essentially a survival horror game, but it looks like it's taking inspiration from the movie Signs and also the movie Fire in the Sky. It's first person, you got a pistol and a radio, and there's an alien invasion going on, and you got the little gray men following you around. Honestly, as someone who was terrified by Signs as a kid, this game is going to freak me out. And they just announced it's coming to console as well, so that just makes my top 15. Number 14 is The Wolf Among Us Season 2. Now, this was a game that was announced years and years ago, and then it was canceled when Telltale crumbled. But then, years later, when Telltale was resurrected, they went ahead and said, oh yeah, we're still making it. So, under the new Telltale banner, they are still making Wolf Among Us 2, and I absolutely adored the first season. It was like one of the last ones I played, even though it was a very early on Telltale game, but I didn't get to it until one of the later, like long after I played the Batman game and Walking Dead and Guardians. Here's hoping the writing can stay just as good as the first one. Number 13 is a game called Witchfire. Now, I think this has been in development hell for a long time. I heard a recent update that they updated it to where it's going to be an open world game now, because originally it was just going to be different zones that you fight in, kind of like Doom. But they just went, screw it, and they made a full-on open world. But it looks like some kind of dark fantasy FPS, kind of almost Quake 1-ish. And I really like Quake 1, so I think this will be right up my alley. And I think you'll notice a pattern as this list goes on. These are a lot of indie games, or even ones that I like to call AAA indie, where a lot of money has gone into them. And a lot of them are ones that have been in development hell and that are finally happening. And who knows, some of these might be delayed. And there are a few games on here that are already out on PC, but they're not out on console, and I'm a console pleb. So that's why they're on the list. Moving on, number 12 is RoboCop Rogue City. This is the new game from Teyon, the developers of the awful Rambo game, but they also made a pretty decent Terminator game, Terminator Resistance. So after playing Terminator Resistance and thinking it was a huge step up from Rambo, I think this has promise. And I know, sue me, but I just watched RoboCop 1 recently, like only a few months ago, and loved it. So after watching the movie, I'm even more excited for this game. It'll probably be like a AA game, it's not going to be AAA. That's how all of Teyon's games are. But as long as it does like one thing and does it well, I'm all for it. Coming in at number 11 is Warhammer 40k Bolt Gun. Now, something about me is I really like so-called boomer shooters, and this is essentially a Doom or Wolfenstein-like FPS. It's got that 90s aesthetic, and it just looks like a straight-up Doom clone, which I'm all for. Now, I know nothing about Warhammer 40k, but I don't think I need to know anything about it to enjoy this type of game, because, like I said, I love boomer shooters. I mean, one of my favorite games this year was Proteus, so I'm gonna love this. We don't know much about it, except for that teaser we got, and it's supposedly coming out next year. Number 10 is a game that made my list of anticipated games last year, but it got delayed, and that is Stalker 2: Heart of Chernobyl. Now, this was supposed to come out last year, but because of the war in Ukraine, it got delayed because their development studio is right there in the heart of where the war was happening. So understandably, it had to be delayed. I'll say what I said last year, which is it looks fantastic, and I've never even played the first Stalker. Looks very Metro-y, which I'm a fan of. And I always found the idea of a game set in Chernobyl a really cool idea, so we're finally getting that. Number 9 is technically not a new game, but it's the Dead Space remake. I only played the Dead Space games about 5 years ago, so I haven't had to wait as long for the series to come back like some people. And after the frankly disappointing nature of Callisto Protocol, Like, I was so much looking forward to that, thinking it was going to be like Dead Space 4, essentially. But it's not. So since that happened, I can't wait to jump back into this game because the first Dead Space is phenomenal. And if they're going to make it look even better than the 2008 original and have, like, new areas to explore, sign me up. And I hope everybody buys this game so we can get Dead Space 2 and 3 remade. Because 2, I think, is probably my favorite still. Maybe. Just maybe a little bit over 1. I don't know. It's a tough decision. And then Dead Space 3, here's hoping they can just fix that game because it was kind of ruined by co-op. Number 8 is Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. I have been waiting, like everyone else has, for 7, 8 years, something like that, by the time this comes out. Yeah, I think it'll be 8 years, for a new Rocksteady game. Now, I knew it wasn't going to be a new Batman game, but I was hoping for, I think a lot of us were hoping for some kind of Justice League game or Superman game. But several years ago, they announced this game, and it feels like it's been at, like, the past 4 E3s or something. Maybe it has, I don't know. And it was originally scheduled for 2023, and then it was said, oh, it's actually going to be out sooner than that in 2022, and then it got pushed back again to 2023. And then at the Game Awards recently, they had a little tribute to Kevin Conroy, and that alone is like, I mean, I was already interested in it, but that alone has me more interested in the fact that this will be Kevin Conroy's last performance as Batman. It's sad, but I want to see what he did for his last one. The reason why it's this low on my list, though, is because I don't really want a multiplayer game from Rocksteady. That's not something I want from them. I know you can play it by yourself, but it looks like it's designed around 4-player co-op, and it looks like a third-person action game, or like a third-person shooter almost. So it's straying quite far from Batman, which was more of a third-person action-adventure, like stealth game, which I preferred. We'll see how it goes. I know Rocksteady, before the Batman games, made a game called... I can't remember what it was called. It was some SWAT game. But here's hoping they can pull it off, because it's not as high up on the list as these other things for me. Number 7 is Hogwarts Legacy. Now, I know there's people that have this at their number 1. And I'm a big fan of the Harry Potter movies. I'm not like some uber fan, though, that read all the books and all that, but I like the movies. I've read a couple of the books. But there's no denying that this game looks incredible. Like, it looks like the type of game we've wanted since we were kids watching those movies. And how long has it been since a Harry Potter game? Like, besides the Lego ones, I think it was at least 10 years. Like, the Deathly Hallows was 2011, so it's been 10 years since that game. And a lot of those were really crappy tie-in movie games that were not good at all. So to see a talented developer like Avalanche take a crack at something like this is pretty exciting. You got a full open-world Hogwarts. You can go to classes, you can ride brooms. It looks great. And it looks expensive, and I think it took like at least 5 years of development, something like that. So that is number 7. And then number 6 is a game called Deliver Us Mars. Now, I think about 3-ish years ago, there was a game called Deliver Us the Moon, and I didn't know what to expect from it, but I played it because it was on Game Pass. Absolutely loved it. It's kind of, I mean, I wouldn't call it a walking simulator, but it might be considered in that category. But it's like a puzzle adventure game. There's not like combat. It's very story driven, but you're exploring the moon. Honestly, it's been so long that I need to replay it because I can't remember a ton of it. But I just, like, you end up going into a rocket and flying to the moon, and it's a lot of fun. But I remember it ending on a cliffhanger and definitely hinting at a sequel. So when I heard Deliver Us Mars was happening, I'm like, yes. And it's coming out pretty soon, too. I think it's Q1 of next year. That's another thing, is it was kind of hard to choose for my top 3. And a lot of my most anticipated games are coming very soon, like Q1 and Q2, which is very rare. Normally, my anticipated games don't come until the end of the year. I mean, last time this happened was 2020 with Doom Eternal. That was my most anticipated, and that was at the beginning of the year. So, number 5 is the Resident Evil 4 remake. Yes, I have 2 survival horror remakes on my list for most anticipated games. Sue me. But as somebody who's played about 10 minutes of RE4, and I just couldn't wrap my head around. I mean, I just didn't like the tank controls at all. So I put it down, and then I heard the remake was happening. So I will definitely go back and play the original, but I want to wait now until this comes out to play RE4. And I've only been a fan of the RE series since last year when I tried 3, the 2 remake, 7 and 8. So it's kind of amazing that I even have a Resident Evil game this high on the list, considering I'm a new fan. But of course, there's a whole generation of people that have loved RE4, and it's one of their favorite games. And I know they're scared about it being messed up potentially because 4 is so beloved. But from what I've seen in the trailers, it looks like they're hewing very close to that original game, but incorporating new elements from the RE2 and 3 remake, and even RE8. This next year and next couple of years are going to be really big for survival horror games. Because you got that, you got the Dead Space remake, you got the Silent Hill 2 remake happening at some point, you got the Alone in the Dark remake, you got Alan Wake 2. There's just so much. It's like a big resurgence of survival horror. And I'm happy because I'm a new fan of that genre. Number 4 is yet another game that was in development hell for 8-9 years, something like that, and that's Dead Island 2. That was supposed to be out at the very beginning of the year, but it was delayed again, I think until March or April. I liked Dead Island 1 from what I remember playing of it, but it was pretty janky. And then Techland, who made that, went off and did Dying Light. And in the meantime, since Dead Island 1, we've had Dying Light 1 and 2 made, which is kind of nuts. But Dying Light 2, I think, was developed and then like scrapped and then started over and then scrapped again and then made again, and it was like switched developers like 3 times. It's been a long and bumpy road for this game. But at long last, I remember that new teaser came out and it was like, wow, this game is actually happening legit, for real now, and it looks great. I still haven't played Dying Light 2, but I've heard people were a little bit disappointed by it. I will make that call once I play it myself. But people are saying this looks like the Dying Light 2 that they wanted. They have a new gore system that looks amazing. It's like an open world LA. It's by, I think, Dambuster Studios, which hasn't done a lot. I think Homefront 2 was their last game, and I don't think that was great, so I'm hoping they've improved since then. Here's hoping after all this time the game doesn't suck. Number 3 is a game I was not expecting to put on this list because I didn't expect to be told about this game this year. But this is something I saw at the Game Awards, and it shot to nearly the top of my list as soon as I saw it, and that is Judas. I remember years ago, Ken Levine, he left making BioShock, formed a new studio called Ghost Story Games. We heard little bits and pieces about it over the past several years. And then the Game Awards a couple weeks ago, we were sitting there, and then suddenly it says Ghost Story Games, and it's like, from the makers of BioShock. And I was like, yes, here we go. It's going to essentially be BioShock 4, even though BioShock 4 is still happening by Cloud Chamber Games. Still want to know more about that. Don't know when we'll see that. I was hoping to see that game, but we kind of did with this. But this looks very Ken Levine-y, but it looks like almost essentially BioShock in space. Sign me up. I mean, I don't need to know anything else except BioShock in space. And the fact that it's already coming out 2023 is pretty exciting. That almost made my number 2 or even number 1 spot. Number 2 is Star Wars Jedi Survivor. I adored Jedi Fallen Order. Even though there was quite a bit of jank in it, it did feel like EA kind of rushed that game out the door. But after the EA exclusivity deal about Star Wars, I think it's over now. It ended early. Because we got one from, or did it end? I don't even remember now. It might still be going because it was kind of squandered. We had it for 10 years. It ends next year, which is kind of nuts. And we did not get a ton of good Star Wars games over the past 10 years. I remember when it started, that Battlefront reboot I thought was going to be good, but it wasn't really. But Fallen Order was one of the very few games that was done really well by EA, and it's probably because EA has very little influence on what Respawn does as a company. Respawn has never made a bad game, and Fallen Order was fantastic, so I think this game is going to be even better. Hopefully they got all the jank smoothed out. They got new abilities for Cal. Looks like he's got a blaster now. There's mounts. I don't know what the story's going to be, but I like the story in the first one, so very excited for this one. And now we come to number 1, and that is a game I've been looking forward to for quite some time. Another game that's been stuck in development hell. That's been the trend for the past couple years. It's all these games that have been in development hell finally coming out. And that is Atomic Heart. This game, I think, was revealed like 7 or 8 years ago. At the time, I knew nothing about it. I only became aware of it maybe like 3 years ago or something like that, when it was kind of re-revealed. And I'm like, whoa, what is this? This looks like Bioshock, but in like Soviet Russia. And that's essentially what it is. And this was something that was supposed to come out this year. I think this also was on my list for most anticipated 2022 games. But it was sadly delayed again. Because they made this awesome trailer that it was like telling us that it was going to be in Q4 2022. And after all that effort, it was like, oh, nope, it was delayed again. But it looks like you got some kind of magic system or whatever it is on your glove, on your left hand glove. And then you got guns. You got crazy looking robots you're fighting. I'm really, really hoping this doesn't disappoint like stuff like Scorn did. I heard some behind the scenes trouble happened with this game. And I guess there was like some mission creep with the game, like the scope kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and then they had to cut a bunch. But every time we see it, it looks better and better, and the frame rate looks more stable. Mick Gordon's doing the music, which is awesome. So yeah, like usual, I think every time I have a most anticipated list, an FPS usually makes my top of my list, and once again, for this year it has. So that's it. That's my top 15 most anticipated games for 2023. If you liked my list, let me know in the comments, and leave your list of your top 10, 15, 20, 25, I don't care, games for this next year. And coming up shortly, my next video will be a list of all the honorable mentions that didn't make this list. So have a happy new year. Next gen is hitting its stride. We're going to get a lot of cool new games. And until next time, thank you for watching.